for Planning and Regulatory Services Committee, 2nd of the 6th, 2021. Yes.
Thank you, IT. Well, firstly, you're all very welcome to the June Planning and Regulatory Services Committee. And firstly, I'd just like to start off by welcoming Councillor Cosby to the committee and Councillor Savage back to the committee following his term as Lord Mayor. It's both very good to be back on plan, and to thank the outgoing councillors for the committee, Councillor Keating and Alderman McCrum, for their service over the year. So move on to agenda item 1.0, apologies. Are there any apologies from the floor? I don't have any currently. Councillor Cosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the welcome as well. I believe Alderman Wilson will be with us shortly, but it could be closer to 4:30 before he gets here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cosby. Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for welcoming me back to the committee. Councillor McNally and Councillor Duffy will be along at some stage.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. So item agenda 2, declarations of interest. Or any from the floor? We'll just take them as we go. Okay, agenda item 3, report from the Strategic Director. So I believe I'm handing over to Sharon O'Gorman to take this one on.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. The report before you is in relation to the annual progress reports on the departmental business plans for the planning and building control departments. You will be aware that the reporting period referred to in the report coincides with the COVID-19 pandemic, and that certainly has changed the context in which we have been working and delivering services. During that period, the performance on the business plans has been kept under review at a directorate level and with the heads of department, and it was agreed that an end of year report would be brought through to committee. The progress report in the appendices outlines the performance of the planning and building control departments against the agreed objectives for the 2021 year, and there is an amber rating, a red, amber and green rating in relation to those. Where items are either in progress or behind, commentary is provided within the report, and those are for noting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sharon. Are there any questions from the floor? Don't see any lights up, members. So just as item for information, so we don't need any proposer or seconder. Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 4.1, which is a notice of opinion, consent to demolish in the conservation area. I believe I'm handing over to Roisin Hamill, who's joining us via Zoom, hopefully.
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall at a meeting of the Planning and Regulatory Services Committee in February, a planning application for the demolition of 2 existing footbridges and construction of 2 replacement footbridges at the same location with new paths and raised boardwalks in Dromore Town Park was presented with a recommendation to approve. Members accepted the recommendation of officers to approve the application. The proposal required the demolition of 2 existing footbridges which were located within the Dromore Conservation Area. In accordance with the Planning Act and the Planning Conservation Area Demolition Regulations, where any council requires conservation area consent, they must make an application to the Department for that consent. The Conservation Area Consent application was processed by the Department for Infrastructure in parallel with the full application. The Department has now written to the Council with a copy of the Notice of Opinion, which gives notice that consent to demolish in accordance with the application should, in the opinion of the Department, be granted subject to compliance with a number of conditions. If the Council does not accept the Notice of Opinion or any of the proposed conditions, a written request must be submitted to the Department for an opportunity to appear before and be heard by the Planning Appeals Commission. In this case, it is recommended that members accept the Notice of Opinion that consent to demolish in the conservation area should be granted, subject to the conditions as set out in the attached notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roisin. Are there any questions, members? Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No questions. Just happy to propose, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. And is there anyone willing to second? Councillor Savage.
Second that.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. So that's proposed by Councillor Nicholson, second by Councillor Savage. So we'll move on to agenda item 4.2. which is consultation on the shaping our electricity future roadmap document. I believe I'm handing over to Colin on Zoom.
Thank you, Chair. Item 4.2, and that's a consultation from Sony, the systems operator for Northern Ireland, in relation to the shaping our electricity future roadmap document. So SONI is the independent statutory electricity transmission systems operator for Northern Ireland, and they are seeking our views on their Shaping Our Electricity Future Roadmap document. This document sets out a range of options to meet the renewable ambition of 70% of Northern Ireland electricity from renewable sources by 2030. Consultation formally closes on the 14th of June, but SONI have granted the Council an extension until the 29th of June. In September 21, SONI will publish the inaugural Shaping Our Electricity Future Roadmap, and this consultation is an opportunity to comment on the range of options proposed. So the Shaping Our Electricity Roadmap consultation sets out a range of options to meet the renewable ambition of 70% of Northern Ireland electricity from renewable sources by 2030. As supported by the Economy Minister, Diane Dodds. The 4 approaches set out by SONI are as follows. Number 1, generation-led. And this will be government policy with influence where renewable energy is generated, favouring locations where the grid is already strong. The report states that it's most likely to lead to more offshore wind generation close to major cities, with less need for new onshore renewable energy sources. The approach proposes 700 megawatts of offshore wind, 150 megawatts of onshore wind, and 350 megawatts of solar. The estimated cost is 120 million, and the report states this approach is likely to result in a grid that allows at least 70% of Northern Ireland electricity to come from renewable sources by 2030. The second approach is the developer-led one, and this is where SONI continues to connect new sources of renewable electricity as requested in any location. The report states that with this option, based on assumed capability, new infrastructure cannot be delivered in time to meet renewable ambition in 2030. The approach proposed 350 megawatts of offshore wind, 700 megawatts of onshore wind, and 350 megawatts of solar. The estimated cost was 361 million, and the report states that taking this approach means it's very unlikely the grid will meet the 70% target by 2030. Third approach, technology-led. This approach uses technical solutions to make the grid more resilient so it can better handle variable nature of renewable energy. The approach proposes approximately 350 megawatts of offshore wind, 700 onshore wind, and 350 megawatts of solar. The estimated cost is 535 million. And the report states there's a high degree of technical uncertainty in this approach. The report continues, for this reason, we believe it would be very challenging to complete all the necessary work in time and would be unlikely to actually make the grid ready for the 70% target by 2030. The fourth approach was demand-led one, and this would be where government policy determines where future large energy users, such as data centres, would locate in Northern Ireland. The approach proposes 350 megawatt of offshore wind, 700 onshore wind, and 350 megawatts of solar. This would be estimated to require up to 10 grid reinforcement projects. Estimated cost 113 million, and the report states that this approach would make the grid ready for 2030 clean electricity targets. But this requires large electricity users to locate in the preferred regions of the grid going forward. In relation to the consultation, we note that the survey questionnaire does not specifically invite the Council to choose a preferred approach from the 4 SONI approaches, or actually rank them. For that reason, the initial officer response does not select one preferred approach and instead sets out the material considerations that should be taken into account by SONI, irrespective of the chosen approach. However, since the SONI committee report was issued, a further review was undertaken by officers, and we have concerns in relation, it has raised potential concerns in relation to approach 4. Approach 4 was the demand-led government policy where future large energy users would locate in Northern Ireland. Because approach 4 would compel new high demand users, such as pharmaceutical, high-tech, data center or computer sector, to potentially locate closer to sources of clean power. Officers' interpretation of this approach is that new businesses investing in Northern Ireland, which are high energy users, may be directed closer to sources of clean power, which appear to be the north and west of Northern Ireland in terms of onshore wind generation, and the north and east of Northern Ireland in terms of offshore wind generation. If officers' interpretation is correct, this could potentially result in new high energy investors being directed away from the ABC Borough, closer to the sources of clean power, which would discourage investment in our borough. Therefore, we propose to amend the draft response to SONI to raise the concerns detailed above in relation to approach 4. Further detail on the 4 approaches and the consultation report can be found in the technical report at Appendix 2 or by following the link on the SONI website. SONI are seeking views on the consultation document so that a finalised Shaping Our Electricity Future can be published in September 21 and aim to meet the renewable ambition of 70% of electricity from renewable sources by 2030. The local development plan team have considered the content of the consultation document and the 4 approaches outlined in relation to our borough and planning matters. The consideration has informed the draft council planning response detailed at Appendix 2, which will be amended to reflect concerns raised in relation to approach 4. The draft response at Appendix 3 welcomes the SONI consultation, highlights concerns in relation to approach 4, and highlights planning and environmental considerations, while stressing the importance of further engagement between the council and SONI to ensure that the Shaping Our Electricity Future roadmap is in line with our council's new local development plan and the potential for sustainable growth and investment within our borough. Members are asked to note the content of the report and agree the draft response to SONI at Appendix 3, along with the additional comments that we've raised after review to approach 4. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Colin, for that report, and certainly some of the concerns you raised are fairly valid. Are there any questions from members from the floor? Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And like yourself, I read the report and I was concerned, and I do share the concerns by the planning officers that, you know, potentially the development could be moved towards very much to the northeast or the northwest, and our area would be obviously not included in that, which wouldn't be very good going forward. Colin, I suppose my question is, we've got 4 options. I know they didn't ask us to choose one. Is there any one that sort of stuck out to you that would be more suitable that we would be sort of in favour of? And in relation to the developer-led approach, is there any more detail on that, as in what form that takes? Is that like public-private partnership, or what way does that kind of work on the delivery of this option? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Colin, would you be answering those?
Yes, certainly. Through the Chair, thank you, Councillor Nicholson. In relation to the developer-led approach, this is in reality maybe a status quo type scenario. There's no significant change in the approach. It is proposing 50% onshore wind and 25% of renewables from solar and from offshore wind. There's actually no location specified in relation to where they would be proposing. It's basically as it is at the moment, where it would be led by applications coming in or proposals being brought forward. The report does state that it requires significant circuit investment across Northern Ireland, and maybe worth highlighting that the report states that due to infrastructure capacity, it's very unlikely in the developer-led approach 2 that the grid will be ready to take 70% of the electricity from renewable sources by 2030. The second point Councillor Nicholson maybe raised was in relation to we weren't asked to rank, we weren't asked to choose one particular approach, but it appears that from what Sony have put forward, they certainly appear to be favouring approach 1 or approach 4. Thank you, through the chair.
Thank you, Callum. Bring you back in, Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks for letting me back in. I suppose that's something that would obviously, because obviously approach 1 and approach 4 is again not I suppose beneficial to our area, if you know what I mean. It really does become this and I'm wondering, you know, is this a tick box exercise? You know, they consult with councils, but it's really strange that not asking for, you know, what you preferred or what you think is best for your council area going forward. So I'm happy enough to propose the letter, Chair. I think it's open enough that allow them to come back and allow more questions down the line. But I think there is more questions to be asked of this, because this could be a major direction for technology and business and locations for development going forward. And we just need to be very, very careful that we don't sort of vote for something that would be us. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Note your proposal. I'll just bring the head of planning in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Nicholson, picking up on your point, I suppose, you know, from the council's perspective, we've had very strong concerns about particularly the option 4 that's set out, because this has potential implications for investors coming into Northern Ireland who could be swayed to go outside of ABC, other parts of Northern Ireland. So we lose out in terms of trying to grow our area. So I think any response that we put back here has got to really highlight that point very strongly, and whether, you know, we should go further than that and see whether or not, you know, a letter and a, you know, letter will go from here, but whether we need to follow that up with other action, something maybe we do want to give some consideration to, because as I said, I think it has strong implications for what way things go economically within the borough in the future.
Thank you, Damien. So we have a proposer. Are there any seconders on the floor? Alderman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm taking on board the Councillor Nicholson has said on Damien. Is there a response? Is NILGA involved in this, Damien? Would they, on behalf of the whole council, would they be councils right round? Would they be making an opinion, or have they been asked?
Do you want to come in on that, Damien?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Certainly we could make an approach to NILGA to make representations on behalf of the whole of local government. The only thing I would say in response to that, and sorry through the Chair, is that some councils may see this as potentially beneficial to them, and not all councils may sign up to raising concerns about what's involved. There are some areas I would expect that could benefit from industries wanting to locate in their jurisdiction. We're unfortunately one of those where we could lose out. So I don't know where that would leave NILGA, but it's certainly something that we could consider.
Thank you, Damien. Yeah, I take your point, depending where the councils are all located, what would be button for their own sort of particular area. But I do think that NILGA's there to represent all the councils in a fair and proper manner, and everything should be considered. So maybe we should consider something that we would look at that, and I'd be happy to second the proposal of that letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Anderson. Thank you for seconding that. Maybe that's something that officers could reach out to NILGA and contact them about this, because certainly I know in our borough we do have clean energy potential, and certainly we need to fight our corner. Okay, so we've got proposer and seconder for that item of business. So we're on to item 4.3, It's an item for information relating to the planning portal. I'll hand over to Damien.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon again, members. Members, the purpose of this report is to update you on the project to replace the planning portal. You will note from the report that there has been some slippage in the project, which is due mainly to the process of extracting and transferring data from the current portal to the new one. The project has slipped by about 3 months and is now expected to go live in spring of next year. On a more positive note, you will also see that due to a revised payment profile, that the cost of the project to the council has been reduced by approximately £136,000. You will also be aware from the report that there has been an extension to the contract for the existing portal, and that the Department for Infrastructure is proposing the establishment of an intelligent client function to help manage the new system. One further point worthy of mention, members, is the decision by Mid-Ulster Council to develop their own IT system. And to that end, they have proceeded to award a contract to a supplier who is understood to be iDocs. And I'm happy to take any questions or queries around that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. It's certainly good to see that reduction in costs. Any questions, members, or points on this item? There's just an item for information. So I'm not seeing any lights on. So we'll move on to item 4.4, an update on planning caseloads. And again, handing over to Head of Planning, Damien.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you'll see from this report that the number of applications received by planning during the period 1st of April to 21st of May, we have a new reporting period, members, due to the movement of the date of the Planning Committee. So during that period, we received 300 applications, which is 114 more than for the same period last year, so significant rise, and 82 more than the same period from the year before, which was pre-COVID. So I think we can take that as a very strong indicator of how application numbers have risen over the last 12 months. The number of applications decided during the period 1st of April to 21st of May is 178, which is 129 more than for the same period last year, and only 76 less than for the year before, which was pre-COVID. And that was back when the department had a full complement of staff and when caseloads were significantly lower. So it needs to be seen in that context, members. During the month of May, 131 decisions were issued, and that's the second highest since November 2018. So numbers are certainly going up in terms of decisions issued. However, unfortunately, we had 190 applications received during the same period. Now, I say unfortunately, that means there's implications for our caseloads, but at the same time, it's positive because we were bringing in additional income to the council. So the number of applications currently in the system, members, is 1,512, which is up by about 59 on last month. And that's really due to that significant number of applications that came in May, which was 190, which is the highest we've ever recorded since planning transferred. Regarding call-ins, during the month of May, we had 1 call-in, members, and that brings our total year to date to 4. Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to take any queries.
Thank you, Damien. Certainly goes to show the strength of interest in business and residential in terms of our borough, given those numbers. Are any questions, members? It is just an item for information, but happy to take any comments. Okay, not seeing any lights on. So we'll move on to my favourite item, 5.1, street naming reports. So we'll hand over to Tom Lavery.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. Item 5.1 is a request for a naming of a development, 36 dwellings, located off Castle Hill Road and to the rear of Dumbarton House in Guildford, and details are on Appendix 1. The applicant's preferred name for this development is Dumbarton Glen, and the applicant's reason for the proposed name is that the proposed development lands are within the grounds of Dumbarton House, which was the former home to the founders of Dumbarton Mill back in the 1800s. So officers have assessed and deemed the proposal compliant, and therefore the recommendation is for members' approval. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Those were a few lights. Bring Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be happy to propose the name as is. It's reflective of the area and reflects the links with the old Dumbarton Mill. So I'm happy to propose, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. Next, we move Alderman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I would be happy to second on Dumbarton as a very popular name in the Guildford area with the mill and house, so very appropriate name. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Anderson. So a proposer and the seconder on that, and I don't see any lights on, so all agreed? Okay, moving on to item 5.2, an update on building control and property certificate application workloads. Hand over again to Tom.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to keep members informed of some of the workloads being undertaken by the department during the last 2 months. And notably, as members say, Appendix 2, in the last 2 months alone, we've received 593 applications with a notional construction value of just over 50.5 million worth of investment. Just on a point of note and reflecting on Damien's stats, for the first 5 months of this year, we are averaging 315 applications per month, which is the highest average since 2016. So during this 2-month period, we undertook 364 plan assessments and statutory decision notices were issued on all of these. The department has also completed just over 2,500 site inspections in the last 2 months. Currently, with the influx of applications, our turnaround times are not quite as fast as we would like, but we will bring members a report. I will bring members a report later in the meeting, which hopes to address this issue and hopes to get us back on track. The department also continues to deliver the council's property certificate function for the conveyancing of properties across the borough. In April and May, we received and administered 352 new applications, and we processed and issued 427 certificates to solicitors and agents relating to property sales in our area. Again, looking back in the last 5 months, we've received 800 more applications than the same period for 2020, and 600 more applications for the same period of 2019, which was pre-COVID. I'm happy to report that we have our new systems are in place and up and running, and we have no backlog at this point in time, and we are turning over, over 90% of these applications are being turned around within 10 working days. Thank you, Chair. This report is for members' information, but I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Thank you, Tom. And is there any questions from the floor? Don't see any lights on. Thank you. Now I move on to item 6, which is confidential report. I need a proposer and a seconder to go into confidential business. I propose by Councillor McLeod, second by Councillor Cosby. Okay, I just need to read out the following statement. Members and online viewers, in accordance with Schedule 6 of the Local Government Act, exempt information, we will now be moving into a confidential session of the Council. This means that we will be turning off the public feed of the meeting. This will be returned when the meeting is restarted. Can I ask the ICT officers to please turn off the live feed and confirm to me when the confidential section of this meeting can proceed? Okay, that should be the live feed restarted. Item 8 is correspondence. There is no correspondence. Item 9, I haven't received any other business, so that's finished the first part of the meeting. We'll now have a short recess until consideration of the planning applications commence. We'll say 10:05 or 4, sorry, 10 past.
1. Hello. 1, 1, 2. Hello. 1, 1.
Okay, that's us back. Okay, thank you, members. We'll start on agenda item 7, which is the applications. Just have to read out the following statement. Members of the public are advised that the Planning and Regulatory Services Committee is being held in the Council Chamber in Craigavon Civic Centre. However, due to COVID restrictions, the number of persons who can physically be facilitated in the chamber is severely limited. As a result, members of the public are only able to view the meeting on YouTube, and anyone wishing to address the committee has been invited in the first instance as an attendee via Zoom. Audio recording is being used to assist in preparing the formal minutes. Therefore, anyone participating in the meeting consents to it being recorded and being live streamed on YouTube. Also, during the course of this meeting, questions may be asked by councillors who are members of the Planning and Regulatory Services Committee, of planning officers, applicants for the planning permission, objectors, or those speaking on their behalf. In doing so, councillors endeavour to ascertain the information which they feel is necessary to enable them to determine the application. However, members of the public should note that councillors will not reach a conclusion as to whether an application should be approved, refused, or deferred until the debate on the application has concluded. Okay, so on to Appendix 1. As members will have seen, Appendix 1 has been removed from the schedule following submission of additional points of objection this morning. So it might come to next month's meeting instead. On to Application 2, which is Appendix 2, which is LA 08 2020 10500. I'm handing over to, is it Sinead or is it Kevin? Sinead? Oh, there you are, Sinead. I see you on Zoom for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Officers have taken that members have read the report in full, so this will be a synopsis only. Policy CTY1 of PPS 21 identifies a range of types of development which are considered to be acceptable in principle in the countryside. The applicant has indicated that this application is to be considered under Policy CTY2A, clustering, and Policy CTY8, infill development. As regards to Policy CTY2A, while officers acknowledge that there are a number of buildings in the wider area, these buildings are characteristically set in sizable plots, set back from the public road and separated by mature, dense boundaries. Given the separation distances between them and the screenings, these buildings represent a scattered group of buildings characteristic of the dispersed settlement pattern prevailing in the area, rather than a compact cluster appearing as a visual entity in the landscape. For these reasons, officers would cite that there is not a cluster of development in the area. In this instance, there is no crossroads associated with the site, and the community building on Cranny Lane, given the separation distance and intervening vegetation, is not associated with any defined cluster. Furthermore, due to the size of the site and its relationship with the host property at number 101 Bleary Road, officers would be of the opinion that the site, if approved, would significantly alter the existing character of this area. As regards to infill policy, officers are of the opinion that a site is not within a substantial and continuously built up frontage. Officers are of the opinion that the dilapidated structure to the southeast of the site is not considered to be a building and has no planned history associated with it. In addition, the site does not respect the existing development pattern along the frontage in terms of size, scale, siting and plot size, and for these reasons, officers are of the opinion that the site is not an infill opportunity under the terms of the policy. As regards to other matters including design, integration, access and means of sewage disposal, officers are of the opinion that, due to the fact that this is an outline planning application, without prejudice to any outcome of a reserved matters application, these matters can be adequately dealt with at that stage subject to appropriate conditions attached. There have been 2 objections to the application from the same address. Officers consider that the matters raised in those representations have been fully addressed in that report. Having regard to all of the above, therefore, officers are of the opinion that proposed development is unacceptable as the proposal is contrary to the SPPS, CTY1, CTY2A, CTY8 and CTY14 of PPS 21 and is recommended that this application is refused. Taking you on to the PowerPoint to give you an understanding of the site. And Ruth, just taking you on, yeah. And that just shows the location in the general area. So it's outside the development limit of Bleary to the southwest within the countryside. Next slide, please. That is an aerial view of the proposed site. So there are a number of buildings in the immediate area. However, for the purpose of the policy and for the purpose of definition of a cluster, officers do not believe there is a cluster of development in this area. Next slide, please. That's the site location plan provided by the applicant. The area in red is the site, and he owns the host property number 101 Bleary Road to the north. Next slide, please. The applicant gave us a concept as regards to infill. So basically the building to the southeast, the existing garage within the site and the host property at number 101, in his interpretation, that's substantially built up frontage. So that just gives you an understanding of where the applicant's concept was coming from. Next slide, please. That's the applicant's concept as regards to a cluster. So they have highlighted an area of 25 metres. You can see right around a circle there, identified the hall at Cranny Lane. Yeah, and that is their definition of what the defined cluster is, and that's for their interpretation. Next slide, please. Officers consider the gap for regards to policy CTY 8 or to be the yellow, because you have to discount the existing building within the site, because it's a gap you have to look at. The red star is roughly the location of the dilapidated structure to there, and we do not consider that to be a building. So therefore, we'll be of the opinion that there are two buildings, and due to the size of that site, it is extremely small. You can only look at the 14 metres width, and that would be out of character with the established pattern along this area of development. Next slide, please. The applicant's examples of size of sites approved of a similar size. So he kindly actually gave us examples which are not too far from the site. Looking at the first example, that is just over 20 metres wide, but you look, that is the entire red line sitting side by side. The gap in that case is over 43 metres. There are two sites actually approved in there, but as I said, alluded to in the previous slide at number 8, we have to look at the gap, and the gap is the yellow bit that I have identified, highlighted in yellow, and therefore this red line is actually a lot bigger. The other one is much bigger again. If the two sides to the right, it's well over 22 metres, so it's bigger again in relation to it. So the critical assessment for regards to CTY 8 is the gap, and this gap is only 14 metres wide, so it's substantially smaller than the examples provided by the applicant. Next slide, please. Photo 1 is a view of the site. So basically the site is in there. It includes the garage to your right-hand side there, and we are discounting that. So it's basically the rear garden of number 101. There are glimpses of the building to the north, which is what we are saying is identified for the closure. And when you're on the site, you can actually see the top of the roof of the dwelling at number 103 Bleary Road. So officers will be of the opinion that the dwelling at 101 Bleary Road, the dwelling at 103 Bleary Road, and those two structures are what is the defined cluster, and anything else is discounted. Next slide, please. That's a photo of the structure beside the site with no plan history. It's heavily overgrown. It is quite a dilapidated state, and we would be of the opinion that it's not actually a building for the purposes of the policy. Next slide, please. So this is a view from the site entrance up towards Ballydugan Road. So you can see you can't even appreciate the dwelling at number 5 Ballydugan Road, which is on the right-hand side, due to the mature screening along the boundary of the that particular host property. So that has been discounted. Next slide, please. This is just at the end of the junction of Ballydugan Road and Bleary Road. You see, looking out, that there's no appreciation of the buildings along that road. They've all got substantial mature heads and around them, and it is quite a rural feel you get rather than a compact urban farm. Next slide, please. That's a view just looking up towards Cranny Road. So again, given the setback of the dwellings on the opposite side of the road, there's not a defined cluster of development in the immediate area. Next slide, please. That's just 103 Bleary Road, the objector's property. The site is just where that arrow is in behind number 101. So for those reasons, we would be of the opinion, subject to conditions, if members were minded to overturn that, a dwelling could be conditioned to not cause any detrimental impact on their amenity. Furthermore, it's difficult to see the site from that particular road, so there's no appreciation of the site while travelling along Bleary Road. Next slide, please. That's it. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Sinead. Also joining us via Zoom is Mr. Timothy Duke, the applicant. Timothy, you're very welcome to the Planning Committee today. I'm now going to bring you in to make a representation in support of the application. You have 3 minutes and a clock should be appearing on your screen shortly. Yeah, can you see that, Timothy?
Yeah.
Okay, so the clock will count down whenever you begin to speak.
The planning officer's assessment has confirmed many of the positive attributes of my proposal, including its ability to successfully integrate into the landscape, and that they have no concerns in terms of residential amenity, access or parking provision. With regard to the officer's concerns under CTY 2A, the planner's report suggested that the site did not fulfill criteria 1 and 2 due to the dense vegetation in the area. However, under a 2017 PAC appeal, the Commission determined that a cluster can be a visual entity despite being well enclosed by mature vegetation. The planner's report also suggested that the community building shouldn't be considered as part of the cluster, as it is 190 metres from the site. However, under a 2019 PAC appeal, the Commission determined that a focal point which was 250 metres from the appeal site would fulfil the requirements of CTY 2A. If the committee are still not satisfied in this regard, I would ask them to consider a 2017 PAC appeal in which the Commission determined that despite the application site not meeting the focal point criterion, the other 5 requirements had been met, and therefore the site complied with the overall thrust of the policy and that it should be approved. The planner's report also had concerns with regard to the size of the plot. However, on measuring the other plots within the cluster, it is found that the existing 101 Bleary Road plot is in fact much larger than many of the surrounding plots, and that after subdivision, the plot would still be equal to the average plot size of the area of 0.17 hectares. Also, the proposed plot on the Ballydugan Road would be larger than the 2 smallest plots in the cluster, and so neither plot size would cause harm to the character of the area. With regard to the concerns under CTY 8, the planner's report stated that the site fails to meet the requirement of a substantial and continuously built up frontage due to the condition and lawful status of the shed to the south-east of the site. I would ask the committee to consider a 2015 PAC appeal in which the Commission ruled that a derelict outbuilding should be counted as forming part of a substantial and continuously built up frontage, and the lawfulness of the building was not a consideration. The planning report also had concerns with regard to the frontage width of the plot, which is 26 metres. However, on measuring the other plots within the close area, it is found that the average width is only 30 metres, and that the proposed plot frontage would in fact be larger than 3 of the smallest plots in the close area, and so would very much be in keeping with the established character of the area. I propose that the precedents and information presented clearly show that the site satisfies all of the requirements, both under CTY 2A and CTY 8, and should therefore receive approval. Many thanks to the members of the committee for considering my statement, and I would welcome any further questions, and I'm happy to provide details of the appeals noted in my statement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duke, for that presentation. You're well within your time. At this point on, you'll only be able to brought in if any members ask you any questions. So, members, are there any questions from the floor? Councillor Savage.
Sorry, Chair. Before we start considering this, Mr. Duke has just asked us to consider 3 different planning appeals, Commission's decisions, which we haven't signed off here at the minute. You know, and just a question that I want to ask the committee, such as, should we really ask for this information now to be brought so it can be considered by the planners, or we're going to have a debate and then ask for this and defer it again? So it's just like we're a bit of clarity now on the way forward, because there's 3 things we have been asked to consider that we haven't got sight of. So it's just like maybe Damien or a steer on that, please, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. Do you want to come in that one point, Damien?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I suppose it's a very good point that Councillor Savage has raised, because neither officers, without, unless Sinead is able to tell me otherwise, officers will not have an opportunity to consider those appeal decisions either. So if they're material to the consideration of the application, I think it would be wise and prudent for all of us to have a look at those and then to bring the application back at a future stage for members to consider at that point. But maybe if Sinead wanted to shed any light, not whether she's aware of those PAC decisions and has taken them into account, maybe she could shed some light on that, sure.
Thank you, Damien. Sinead, were you able to review those plan appeals that were mentioned there, or is that new information to you as well?
No, they haven't been submitted so far. Mr. Duke unfortunately didn't even give me the full reference number, so I wasn't able to take it down and Duke at my iPad, I suppose, to give an indication of what it is. But I would, I suppose, would say that as regards to clustering, it's very much a visual assessment, and there is a difference in opinion between the officers' defined cluster and the applicant's defined cluster. So on that reasons, you know, it's a degree of vegetation around it. It's not critical in some stages if, for argument's sake, the topography of the land was such that no matter what the vegetation is, you can clearly see a close net of development, which is what clustering is about. As regards to a dilapidated shed, I did look at more recent appeals in regards to what would be an outbuilding. I have a few 2019 appeals myself, where the PSC commissions would discount those for the purpose of the policy. There wouldn't be count as regards to the definition of a building. And I know Mr. Duke had cited a 2015 appeal, so this was considerably updated. As regards to clustering not having a focal point, there is one out there. It has been provided as regards to other clustering examples we have had through this planning committee. It was a one-off in regards to it. It's a very different site than was here, given the fact that that particular site it could never accommodate any other development. If that was accepted here, there would be numerous other opportunities throughout this area for clusters of development if that were accepted, that the community building was not critical or a focal point was not critical. If that's of any help to members.
Thank you, Sinead. Do you want to be brought back in, Councillor Savage, on that, or well, let's see what other members have to think first. Okay, Councillor Cosby, you're on next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Councillor Savage raises a fairly important point. It was a 2017 PAC recluster, 2019 refocal point, 2015 re-outbuilding. And I suppose I would want to make sure that full consideration would be given to the evidence in relation to those to ensure that we are factoring in the material factors in that, because they sound to me as being material considerations, and Sinead has not seen those, albeit she has cited some more updated ones. However, it might just not be like for like. So I would prefer if that information was forwarded to planners and it was reconsidered again and brought back with an updated report in light of the information that we have just heard this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Cosby. Here the points being raised, I'm just conscious that we do have a protocol for the operational committee and do see other lights on. So I think I have to take those other lights in before we go to a discussion on that kind of issue. So we'll just take the next person in, which is Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks everybody for the presentation. And like the previous two speakers, these could be material consideration. We don't know. We haven't seen them, and if she hasn't seen them, we're just going to have to, we need to see them. There's a couple of things, I wrote a couple of notes, in relation to this application, and Sinead's kind of sort of clarified it. But under policy 2A, a focal point is required. Whether it be a crossroads, whether it be a public building. I just want Sinead to confirm that. And in relation to the infill element of it, the key in the policy is the word building. And the question is whether or not we consider the structure that's in the photograph. It's very hard to tell from the photograph, Chair. Is it a building or is it not? I don't want to get into a long protracted debate on when's a building not a building or anything like that. But at the end of the day, that's key to that policy, because that's one of the three that sort of determines infill policy. So if it's not a building, it's not an infill, because there's no three buildings. So That's a key thing within it, despite the appeals, because the appeals would actually, give you a direction if you're accepting it was a building or whatever. So I think that's something we need to clarify as well, but it's very hard from that photograph. Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. And Sinead, do you want to come in on those 2 points, really about the focal point and, the issue around whether that structure is a building?
Yeah, well, first of all, the policy says provided all the following criteria met. It doesn't say provided a number, so it clearly says all the following criteria met. And then for us as officers to dissect and choose which one we prefer to meet just dilutes the policy significantly and sets a dangerous precedent going forward for officers and indeed members of this Plan and Regulatory Service Committee to make a decision on these types of applications. And as regards to a building, as I said, I didn't get the full PSE reference Mr. Duke provided in 2015. I've had a number since with regards to what constitutes a building. Indeed, there has been a number through this Plan and Regulatory Service Committee. But I suppose as members have alluded to, Councillor Cosby and co, that if there are critical assessment and we can look at those. It is very much a visual assessment too for members if they wish. I'm trying to say we could go back and there still could be quite a considerable difference in opinions of where the cluster is. Is the focal point of Cronny Lane, is it associated with the cluster? And indeed, is that building the building? So it is very much a visual assessment, a clustering, just supposed to put that out there.
Thank you, Sinead. Councillor Nicholson, going back in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I suppose, obviously, I can see the direction of travel here, Chair. And I suppose, and I'm not saying, but, I think we maybe need to see this one, because it is such as Sinead says, it's a visual thing. And I think for the committee to make their own mind up whether this is a building or not, or whether it's a cluster, I think you need to see it in the ground. You'll never get it in photographs, Chair, and it's only my opinion, so I'd like to hear what other members think.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. We're still in the question phase, so maybe we'll have to just leave that for a moment. Alderman Anderson, you're in next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Sinead and Mr. Duke for your presentations. I'm coming on the same theme there as Councillor Nicholson. I've taken a wee note here. What is that building? I couldn't make out what the building was. It was just a photograph, and certainly if it means maybe going out and seeing for ourselves, maybe an opportunity. But could I seek some clarification, Sinead, reference this community building or focal point? I think you talked about it's 190 metres away from the actual site. But I think Mr. Duke may have talked about inside the red circle or the circle, it was maybe 200 odd metres. So what constitutes or what determines the community building, how far it is away to, because it would be crucial if that was considered as a community building. So I would like some clarity on that and see what could be considered or could it be considered within this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Anderson. Sinead, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, first of all, there is no denying that hall at community or at Cronny Lane is a community building. It's a community hall, so it is a community building. What we are saying is due to the fact of not just the separation distance, but the intervening vegetation and the awareness of that building with the existing buildings in the general area, they're not all associated with each other. So there's no, it's not associated with the cluster, because what I'm saying to you is when you're out on site, the only appreciation you get of the cluster is while on Ballydugan Road, which is the 101 Bleary Road, 103 Bleary Road, and the associated outbuildings. The rest you can't appreciate as a compact visual entity, which is a cluster. And for those reasons, now what Mr. Duke says with regards to the distance from the site is absolutely correct. It's not critical. There's nowhere in policy to say if it's over a certain distance, it has to be discounted. And there are instances, no doubt, in the general area, not this area, but the general area throughout the rural area, where a building of even more than that could be appreciated with a cluster of development in the rural area. So what Mr. Duke is saying is correct, but in this instance, the critical factor is not just the distance, the fact you can't even appreciate that community hall from the site. There's no real defined cluster cluster. There's a loosely scattered development of buildings in the area, and for those reasons, we wouldn't say it's a cluster of development, which is a visual entity in the local landscape. So for that reasons, I understand where the PSC would say there's some instances that a community or focal building out with that particular distance could be appreciated with and could provide a focal point. But in this case, officers of opinion that it doesn't. I don't know if that helps you anyway at all, Alderman Anderson.
Thank you, Sinead. Alderman Anderson, I'll bring you back in.
Thank you, Sinead. Your reply tells us it could be, the words it may be or could be considered a community building. I think we, as a planning committee, have to take that on board. Is it a community building, and can it be considered visually looking at it? Maybe that's an opinion that the officers are taking here. But if we have PSC telling us that there are opportunities, there are occasions where something like this could be considered, is that a PSC? That's what we're trying to define. Has the PSC approved something like this in the past from what Mr. Duke's telling us here? And do we know that? And if we do know that, it's maybe something that we as a committee should consider too. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Anderson. Councillor Savage.
Chair, I'll wait till you move to the debate stage. I see there's no more lights on, so stuck my. Okay, Chair. Thanks. No, well, my thinking on this is, and I think a few other members have alluded to it already, is that we need to consider the decisions. I know Sinead has highlighted more recent ones, but for the sake of completeness on this report, we maybe need to consider the PSC decisions that Mr. Duke raised, and also in relation to the building. As Councillor Nicholson alluded to, I've looked at the picture, and I think that's something that's needed to be seen with your own two eyes. So I'm not making any proposals now, but I think that's something that we need to consider, that we maybe need to go out and have a look at that in the flesh, just to put our minds at ease on what it actually is, because the picture isn't that clear. So that's just really my thinking, and hopefully other members will.
Thank you, Councillor Savage, and I would be sort of leaning similarly on those thoughts myself. Councillor Nicholson, you're in next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And if you'll allow me, can I ask Sinead one more question? Sinead, obviously in relation to infill policy, there has to be a substantially built up frontage. And I'm just looking at the map, number 101. I just want to ask you a question. It appears from the photographs, and again, it addresses the main Blairy Road as opposed to the minor road, which this site addresses. Is that your opinion, or are you accepting that number 101 forms one of the buildings of a substantially built up frontage?
The building does front. Sorry, the building does front 101. The building does front 101 Blairy Road, but for the assessment of a frontage, and indeed backed up with the PSC, because the side elevation of the garden extends to the road, we would consider 101 as part of the frontage. Yes. Your main elevation doesn't have to front the road. The gardens wrap around. There's no gap between the building and the road. It's part of the existing curtilage, and for that reason, the curtilage extends on to Ballydugan Road. And yes, it would be considered as part of the frontage.
Thank you, Sinead. And just to check one last time if there is any other questions, or will we move into the debate stage? Question from Councillor Cosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just briefly, Sinead, I'm just looking through Mr. Chairman, some of the photographs of the site, and also trying to compare some of the angles and the views with the aerial photograph of the site. And I am wondering, is there a photograph from the front entrance of the site towards the community hall? Because obviously this is going to be a significant factor somewhere along the line, and a photograph there would have been useful. Do you have any on file that could maybe be added, or if not, then I'm probably thinking also that it might be useful to actually get out on site and look that direction ourselves. Because if you're taking the photograph in summer, when the hedgerows are particularly full, you might get a different view when you get into the winter, when maybe the hedges are cut back and things like that, and the foliage is maybe just not as thick and dense. You maybe could see the hall from the front of the property as well. So I'm not clear without actually seeing the lay of the land either.
Thank you, Councillor Cosby. Sinead, would any of those photos, such as photo 4, photo 5, in your view, sort of show the hall from that vantage point, or?
There's a couple of points in that. I suppose members, that basically the community hall has to be associated with the cluster. So we're saying as officers, the cluster is only confined to 101 and 103 Bleary Road and their buildings, hence, and from those viewpoints, it's not associated or viewed. However, if members were of the opinion once a site visit was done that the cluster, there is a cluster in the area that extends beyond those buildings and even extends to the other side of the road, or for argument's sake, you only have to view the community hall with the cluster. And if the cluster is extended beyond the site, then that is a part of the assessment. We are saying no, it's not. It doesn't go beyond 101, 103 and the gap site. And if I took a photograph from the site entrance towards Community Hall, you'd be simply getting a row of hedgerows towards you, so it would be of no avail to you. But if a site inspection was undertaken and members were of the view that they believe the cluster extends beyond what officers review, well, that could be looked at in relation to further photos in the presentation going forward.
Thank you, Sinead. And are there any further questions? Don't see any lights on, members, so we will now formally move into the debate stage. Any members want to raise any further points for the debate or discussion? I'm not seeing any lights on, so we move into members' decision. Are there any proposals on the floor? Not seeing any lights on. Councillor Savage?
Chair, I would propose that we get the 3 decisions that Mr. Jukes referred to, so they can be considered by the planning officers, and also to avoid having another meeting and then deciding to go out and site that. We'll have a site visit. Maybe look at this structure to see what's what there. So that I would make that a proposal, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. Councillor Nicholson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, the direction of travel, I think I'm happy enough to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. So a proposal on the floor to carry out a site visit, and in the meantime allow the applicant to send on those planned appeal decisions to the officers. Are there any other proposals on the floor? Not seeing any lights, so we all agreed, members, on that proposal from Councillor Savage? Okay, we're all agreed, and thank you, Mr. Duke, for taking part in the meeting today. Okay, members, we're now on to Appendix 3, which is application LA 08 2019-1423/0. Members will note there was an addendum report circulated. At this point, I'll hand over to Nicola to take us through the report and the PowerPoint presentation. So Nicola, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. This is an outline application which seeks permission for a new dwelling and garage. The recommendation is to refuse, and the reasons for refusal are set out in the planning report. There's no relevant planning history and no third-party representations. There are no objections from any main consultees. However, the Natural Environment Division have advised there's no accompanying ecological information as this site's within a Ramsar and an ASI. The main determining issues are set out in the planning report, and in terms of the principle of development, the site's located in the rural area close to Loughney, and the main planning policy is PPS 21, and one of the policies is CTY2A to permit development of a dwelling within a cluster. Policy CTY2A states the planning permission will be granted for a dwelling at an existing cluster, provided all 6 of the criteria are met, as you just discussed in that previous application. In this case, officers do not accept that the proposal meets the full requirements of clustering policy. There's a ribbon of development on the opposite side of the road to the east and south of the site, and a cluster to the north at the crossroads. However, officers do not consider that this site meets criteria 4 and 5 and fails the SPPS CTY1 and CTY2A. The site's not bounded on 2 sides by development in the cluster. I have examples of recent PAC decisions within my presentation, and they advise that it must be bounded by development on 2 sides. and that if there's a physical separation by a road, that the development on the other side of the road can't be considered. So there are a number of PAC decisions on this, and I have a 2020 A0005, which was issued on the 15th of March this year, the decision, which is in my presentation. In this case, the proposal would not be absorbed into the cluster through rounding off and consolidation, and it would significantly alter the existing character of the rural area and result in the extension of urban development along this road and will visually intrude into the countryside. There are other PAC examples in my presentation which highlight how clustering as a visual entity should be considered, and notwithstanding my previous point raised, number 29 on the opposite side of the road does not read with the visual entity within the cluster of development at the crossroads, given the separation and visual break. In terms of integration, the site is large and open, and provision of visibility displays would open the frontage, and officers consider that this proposal also fails CTY 13 integration. Officers consider that the proposal would add to a ribbon of development and damage rural character. And they also consider that it would result in suburban build-up of development when viewed with existing and approved buildings and dwellings on the Burn Rampart. So the proposal fails the SPPS CTY 8 and CTY 14. In terms of access and traffic, DFI Roads in their response state that they have no objection to the proposed access. In terms of impact on residential amenity, as this application is for outline planning permission, all matters relating to design and layout are without prejudice and reserved for future consideration. In terms of impact on built and natural environment, again, without prejudice, sewage disposal under CTY 16 could be conditioned. However, the site is within Lough Neagh and Lough Beg Ramsar and an area of scientific interest. 2 environmental designations. Shared Environmental Services have considered the potential impact through an initial screening of the proposal on the special protection areas and special areas of conservation and Ramsar areas, and assessed it in accordance with the requirements of Regulation 43(1) of the Conservation Natural Habitats Regulations, and have advised that the proposal would not be likely to have an effect on features within the European site. However, the Natural Environment Division, as a statutory consultee, has advised that a biodiversity checklist should be completed to assess the implications for conservation and for the enhancement for biodiversity. The Natural and Environment Division have not been able to provide a full response to these issues, and without the submission of this information, this proposal fails to comply with the SPPS and policies NH1, NH2 and NH5 of PPS2 and Natural Heritage. I'll just go through my presentation. Thank you. Okay, just ahead and next slide. Yes, this is a location of the site then within the general area. It's at Burns Rampart, which is just up close to Lough Neagh. Next slide, please. This is an aerial view of the proposed site, and I've identified the properties in and around the site within this slide. Next slide, please. This is the site location plan, which has been provided. Next slide, please. This is a PAC decision which was issued this year, which advised then that development on the other side of a road isn't considered as part of being bound on 2 sides, and it was refused at appeal. Next slide, please. This is a slide which I've marked up some of the properties actually which were identified as not forming part of the cluster, the visual entity. So although, and even the Commissioner has said that although, you know, by looking at the map, it looks like there is a better relationship, that it doesn't appear as a visual entity within the landscape. And the visual link between the buildings do not meet the requirements of policy in terms of providing a cluster with a visual entity. Next slide, please. This is another example which I thought was useful just in terms of the fact of some of the development being separated, then not being part of a cluster. And in this case, this application site was refused as well. Next slide, please. This is a view of the site going south then on Burn Rampart, just over there on the right-hand side of the road. Next slide, please. This is the crossroads. So you can see the visual, the cluster of development. There is a cluster of development around the crossroads, but this site then extends away from that into the open countryside and isn't part of that. Next slide, please. Then this is looking down from the crossroads towards the site. You can see that the site then leads into the open countryside, and any proposal here would just continue to extend that further. Next slide, please. This is the other side of the road. This is, I think, number 29 Burn Rampart, which is on the opposite side of the road. There is a ribbon of development which extends, but as you can see, there's actually a gap. There's a side up towards the crossroads, but then there's quite a visual break between this house and the crossroads. Next slide, please. This is the visual break then, although there's a site on-off set over and away from the crossroads, this new building. Next slide, please. Then this is just a view then from the roadside towards the site. I think that completes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sinead. And again, just to highlight, there was an addendum report that was circulated around. There are no other presenters on this application, so we go straight into the question phase. Is there any questions on the floor? Councillor McAlinden.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nicola. I suppose it's something similar to the previous application on saying this. As you look at the map, and you see we mentioned focal point, and you can see the Bay Hall, which is the community hall, and you mentioned that it has to be bounded on two sides by other developments. Can you maybe divulge further on this, Nicola, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McAlinden. Nicola, do you want to comment back on that point about the Bayshore Hall and those sites?
Well, the Bayshore Hall is further up, and it is part of the cluster. So we accept that there is a cluster of development at that crossroads, but this site then is further south. There's actually a number of properties then in between it and the site. There is only one property then, I think it's number 30C, which is immediately north of it, but officers don't consider that there's any other sites which are bounding on, there has to be two sites or development bounded on two sides for it to meet the requirements of this policy. In this case, we don't consider that there is another one. There is one site bounded on it, but not a second one. And on that basis, it fails the requirements of the policy.
Thank you, Nicola. Do you want to come back on that, Councillor McAlinden, or are you content? Okay, next then, Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Nicola. Just back on that point, Nicola, obviously number 30C bounds the site on one side, and obviously 29 is across the road. Is it the fact that it's across the road it can't be considered? Is that your sort of interpretation of the policy? Just to get that clarification, please.
Through the chair.
Nicola?
Yeah. Yep. Through the chair. Yes, that's exactly it. I mean, I've used one example, but there are a number of PAC examples actually explaining that bounded on means that it has to be immediately beside, and that a road separating it. Am I still on there? Sorry.
Yeah, we can still hear you. You just off video.
You can still hear me, sorry. Sorry, that a road on the other side of, a dwelling on the other side of a road cannot be considered for the purposes of the policy to be bounded on. So there are a number of examples in the PAC, but I've used one because that was a very recent one, which explained that in full. If we want to go back to the presentation and maybe just double check that those numbers to the aerial view where I've indicated all of just to make sure that I've got the right numbers. Sorry, just go back to the aerial view over. So I think it's the third slide, maybe. One, yeah, that's there. Sorry, yes. So number 29 and number 30C, yes. So we would consider that there is a cluster, the Bayshore Hall, number 30A, number 30 and 30C. There is a cluster within that grouping. even number 40 is set away, and in terms of being visually linked, there's because of the distance. Looking at some of the PAC examples that we have, that wouldn't necessarily be considered to be part of that visual entity.
Thank you, Nicola. You content, Councillor Nicholson? Do you want to pop back in?
Yeah, Chair. I think that's clarified thing. The only other question: the trees beyond, Nicola, are they protected?
The trees beyond to the south of the site, they're not protected, but they are within the Ramsar and the ASI. So, so any proposals for them would have to consider that as well.
Thank you, Nicola. Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Chair, and Nicola, thank you for your presentation. Nicola, I just want a bit of clarity around refusal reason number 6. It's essentially saying that because it's in the Ramsar site, it's a designated site of local and international nature conservation, and I was happy enough for that. And then when I looked on down, and you'd alluded to the shared environmental services, no significant impact. And I think you alluded to that there was not enough information for them to make a decision. So really my question is number 6, could that change, or is that refusal reason, is that set in stone, or is there any information that could come to light that would change that? Because the report says this is in the site, and then the addendum that came in today stated that the site lies within 2 Ramsar areas, but it does not encroach in them. So there's nobody here from the applicant to explain that one. But could you just clarify refusal reason 6, is that set in stone, or is there information that could come into shared environmental services that would change that?
Do you, Nicola, do you want to back on that?
Yes, thank you, through the Chair. It's not information to come through shared environmental services. Shared environmental services have done a screening exercise in regards to the application. It's a desktop exercise to determine whether there's likely effect on a European protected site. And they've just done that from a desktop. But in terms of our policy on PPS2 and nature conservation, the site is within the Ramsar. There is potential for protected species. We haven't received any biodiversity checklist, which is required as part of this application to determine whether there's any potential impact on both species and the area. And although SES have done an initial screening, that really would be expected to be submitted still as part of this application to determine that aspect of the proposal.
Thank you, Nicola. Content, Councillor Savage. Okay, thank you. Are any further questions? Alderman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And just on the last question, could I ask Nicola, was the applicant made aware of the additional information that was required, or were they asked for it and they just didn't bother doing it? Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Would you like to come back on that?
Thank you, through the Chair. Yes, the applicant was aware, and the applicant just advised that they considered, because SES have come back, that they didn't consider they needed to submit it, but it is officer's opinion that this is a requirement of planning policy.
Thank you, Nicola. You content, Alderman Anderson? Okay. Any further lights, members? Okay, I'm not seeing any further lights, so we'll move into the debate stage. Any points of view, members, that you'd like to share? Not seeing any lights on, so we'll just move into the members' decision phase. Is there any proposals from members from the floor? Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. And I suppose, considering what Nicola has given a presentation and the answers to the questions, and the fact that it is a protected area and it doesn't comply with the cluster policy, I think I propose we accept the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Is there a seconder for that recommendation to know if it's valid? Councillor McAlinton, I think you're in next.
I was going to make a counter proposal that we maybe ask for a site meeting, please, given the complexities of the previous one as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor McLennan. Just aware there are two proposals on the floor, neither are seconded. Councillor Savage, you're light on next.
Thank you, Chair. I will second Councillor Nicholson's proposal.
Okay, thank you. So that's Councillor Nicholson's proposal to accept the recommendation that has a seconder. Is there any seconder for Councillor McLennan's proposal? Councillor Cosby, you a different proposal? No. Oh, I'll bring in, sorry, Councillor Cosby.
Thank you. I the light on just to second Councillor Nicholson, but the light went on just as Councillor McLennan made his proposal, and I was actually to disagree with it, to say that I don't think a site meeting will change the situation that's in front of us because of the evidence and certainly the number of PAC decisions that Nicola has raised and brought to our attention this evening. I just don't think a site meeting will make any material difference whatsoever. So I'm happy with Councillor Nicholson's proposal on the floor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cosby. I'm just conscious that Councillor McLennan's proposal doesn't have a seconder. Are there any seconders for that proposal? Councillor Toman?
Yes, no, I'm happy to second that given the complexities of it as well.
Okay, members, so that's two proposals, one from Councillor Nichols to accept the recommendation or refuse, one from Councillor McLennan to do a site visit. Are there any third proposals on the floor? Okay, so two proposals, so I'm sensing that there's no agreement, so we'll have to move to a vote on the first proposal. Okay, members, since we're on Zoom, I'm going to have to call you out one by one and register your votes. So we'll just get it sorted now. Okay, first up, Alderman Anderson.
I vote in favour of Councillor Nicholson's proposal.
Okay. Alderman Barr isn't present. Alderman Twyble.
I accept the recommendation of Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Alderman Twyble. Alderman Wilson.
Yeah, yes for Councillor Nicholson's proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Cosby, you're next.
I'm for the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Cosby. Councillor Duffy's not present. Councillor McAlinden.
Sure.
Okay, that's against. Councillor McClelland, where are you?
I'm in favour of Councillor Nicholson's proposal.
Thank you, Councillor McClelland. Councillor McGill. Sorry, can you repeat that, Councillor McGill? Four. Thank you. Councillor McNally.
For, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Nicholson.
For, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Savage.
For, Chair.
Councillor Toman.
Against.
Thank you. And myself for. Just give me a second to total this up, members. Okay, thank you, members. The result of that vote was 10 in favour of the proposal and 2 against. So the proposal from Councillor Nicholson that we accept the officer's recommendation to refuse has passed, and therefore we'll not be proceeding on to the other proposal. Okay, thank you, members, and thank you, Nicola. Okay, we're now moving on to Appendix 4. That's correct. Just wait there. I think, just a note, members, I think the reason why the application was before committee was the application was called in by Councillor O'Hanlon, and then I believe there was an email correspondence from Councillor O'Hanlon about an hour before the meeting withdrawing his call-in proposal. It is not as yet clear whether Councillor O'Hanlon notified the applicant whether their call-in has been removed. Therefore, as such, in the interest of fairness, we have to proceed and clear the application. And I've been advised as such by the Director and Head of Department for Planning. So in terms of Appendix 4, it's LA08 2020 12850. Members will note there is an amendment report, and I'm handing over to Sinead to take us through the presentation. Thank you, Sinead.
Thank you, Chair. Members, our officers have taken that members have read the report and indeed the addendum report in full, and as such this will be a synopsis only. Policy CTY3 states the planning permission will be granted for a replacement dwelling with a building to be replaced exhibits the essential characteristics of a dwelling, and as a minimum all external structural walls are substantially intact. Officers would accept that the building to be replaced has all external walls intact. However, we have concerns that the building does not exhibit any essential characteristics of a dwelling. To help us in this case, we have referred to what the PSC would have hoped to see, what would be the essential characteristics of a dwelling house. And they would say it not unreasonable to accept to see a chimney, domestic scale window and door openings, a chimney breast and some internal room divisions, all of which would give the building the appearance of a deed that it was a dwelling at one time. The addendum report that came in by the agent seek to address the reasons for refusal. Now, he first of all sets out that there was a larger dwelling built alongside this building, which would tie in with what the Griffith maps show. However, this was removed, and that also would tie in, I suppose, with our thinking in regards to the planning history under 1977 approval, which is so dated that we wouldn't have the file now, but it was a replacement for 114 Kilmore Road. So it's of our case that the building was replaced. As regards to the Griffith valuation, we have looked in detail of what it states, and it says house and land. It didn't say houses and land or dwellings, so it didn't demonstrate that there was more than one house here. So that didn't give us any evidence to suggest there's more than one. The written representation advises that the building has since been adapted and there has been an additional window and additional door put on it, which would not be unusual. Indeed, he has referred to the lack of a chimney on the building shouldn't be fatal, and we would agree with that. The lack of a chimney wouldn't be fatal. However, they have to have some characteristics, a hearth, some internal subdivision, some sort of internal characteristics of dwelling house. This has no external or no internal characteristics of a dwelling house whatsoever. In contrast, it's like an outside store. You'll probably see from the Den report, the agent submitted a photograph of what the house could have looked like. It clearly states that this is not the house, but made an example of one that there is no chimney. And indeed, there would be no chimney in those houses, but there would have been an opening and indeed a hearth in it, and there would be some sort of internal characteristics of a dwelling house in that place. So we are still not convinced that this particular building is a dwelling house. As regards to the off-site replacement, the written representation advises that the curtilage of the building is so restricted that there will be no provision for car parking, and indeed there would be amenity space or amenity space for the new dwelling. And officers would accept that, given the fact that the site is so restricted, an off-site replacement, if members were minded to overturn, could be accommodated on this site. With regards to the access concerns, the written representation advice this can be overcome. However, they've never provided any details for us in that case, and they have advised that such a drawing is not normally required outline stage. It's not normally required outline stage if it's clear from the site location map that there would be land within the ownership, i.e. outlined in blue or red, that the visibility displays can be accommodated. In this case, it's not easily seen from the site location plan that the visibility display is required because they're not using any existing access, because there's no existing access there, can be accommodated. Unlike the previous one at Bleary, where 101 was within the control of the applicant, so the visibility displays could clearly be accommodated in that case. Therefore, the refusal reason under PPS 3 has not been withdrawn either. So therefore, the new information does not demonstrate that the building was a dwelling. In contrast, it confirms that there was a larger dwelling on this site that has since been removed. Also, the opinion of the proposed development is unacceptable as proposed is contrary to CTY 3 of PPS 21, as the building replaced does not exhibit the essential characteristics of a dwelling, and furthermore is contrary to policy AMP 2 of PPS 3 in that the applicant has failed to demonstrate that this access would not prejudice road safety or significantly inconvenience the flow of traffic, and therefore we would recommend the plan of permission be refused. And taking through the PowerPoint. That just shows it in the general area. So it's outside Portadown, just south of the small village of Kilmore. Next slide, please. That's an aerial view of the site. So what they wanted was an off-site replacement. So the building so restricted to the front of that property at 114. They wanted it sited back into this area of land to the rear. Next slide, please. That's the site location plan outlining the area in red again. There's no other area in blue to the south, etc. So it's difficult to ascertain from that site location plan that the required visibilities that we would be required on a DCAN 15 can be accommodated in this case. Next slide, please. That's just the applicant's concept plan. So basically, they've looked at there are existing apple farm and a livestock farm in between the site, but there's a 75-metre radius that could be accommodated to the far end of the site out with that to ensure that there's no amenity concerns for the proposed residents. And then the building is that small building to the north, highlighted in green. Next slide, please. That's a photo of the building to replace at the present time. So it's a small structure, corrugated tin roof and 2 openings. Next slide, please. That's a close-up of the building. So there's a small building there, and indeed part of it was previously an old stone building, and that's a close-up of the window opening and the door. Next slide, please. It's just views from inside the building. So there's nothing in there at all to try to demonstrate that it previously was building. In contrast, it seemed to be an old store or an add-on or outbuilding that probably was attached to a main building at one stage. But for the purpose of the policy, it doesn't demonstrate that there has been a dwelling as regards to this particular building. Next slide, please. That's the map of the Griffiths. So I was trying to explain it as an L shape. So that building would be the wee bit to the north, and the additional written representation received from the agent clarifies that particular building to the south in the bottom of the L shape was a dwelling and has since been removed, but he alludes to the fact that there actually was 2 dwellings on this site, and so that part to the north was still a dwelling house. Next slide, please. That's it. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Sinead. Okay, members, are there any questions on this application? Okay, Councillor Nicholson, you're in first.
Yeah, thanks, Sinead, and thanks, Chair. Looking at the Griffith map, Sinead, and then looking at what's on the ground, obviously in the map, which is 1900 to 1907, obviously it's all one building. It reads all as one building, one block, and then obviously the one below, which is 1905 to 1957, there's obviously a dwelling of sorts and still this L-shaped building in the bottom. But then obviously when we look at the location map, there's 2 dwellings. Is there any plan history or anything on that site for those? Is it number 122 and 114 in relation to, were they replacements themselves, or is there anything there that would sort of suggest that that the 2 dwellings that were in existence within this complex have already been sort of used? Just to get that clear in my head. Thanks, Sinead.
Councillor Nicholson, Sinead, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, officers can categorically say that dwelling at 122 was granted as replacement dwelling. That's undisputed because the evidence is there in the description. 114, it says site for dwelling, but it didn't use the word replacement. But the address was 114, and normally with a replacement, you actually have an address. So I can't conclusively say that 114 was a replacement, but 112 definitely was granted as a replacement. The written representation received from the agent says that there was a dwelling there and has since been knocked down and removed. But unfortunately, I cannot say that 114 was granted as replacement dwelling due to the fact that the history doesn't say in the description site for replacement dwelling. In contrast, 122 does.
Thank you, Sinead. Councillor Nicholson, you want to come in on that?
Thanks, Chair. And the only other question I have, was there any evidence put forward in sometimes in these scenarios we get affidavits and things from people that lived in the locality that remembers these things as dwellings? Is anything like that we're missing or anything? No, thanks.
Yes, the officers actually did go back to the applicant and say, have you anything for us, anything to try to aid the cause here in relation to that this previously was a dwelling. Now, there was a sort of a blurred photograph presented, but it didn't demonstrate A, that this was a site, and B, it gave no indication that there was a dwelling on this site, so there was of no help at all. And further to that, then no further information was given. So we did give the applicant and agent an opportunity to provide information to say that it was previously a dwelling house and nothing. And since even the written representation, it hasn't come forward with any additional information either. There's a photograph, but that's not the site in question. It's said that perhaps it could have looked like this. So unfortunately, no, there has been no information with regards to that.
Thank you, Sinead. Next down, Councillor McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I note, Sinead, during your report that you said that there had been no chimney, and I assume that roof has come on at a later date. I just happened to notice at, I think it was slide number 9, when you're with the pictures inside the dwelling or inside the building, that there is red brick in the wall. And I suppose I wanted to ask, has Sinead contented herself that wasn't at one time a hearth or a fireplace of some sort? As it is said, the roof, I assume, has come on at a later date, and maybe that may or may not have been the case. That might have been something. So it's hard to tell from the photograph, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor McNally. Sinead, do you want to come back on that point?
Yeah, those particular red bricks are the inside of what would have been the outside of the window ledge. So it's in around the edge of the window, which is commonplace in outbuildings of that particular period. But it's nothing to indicate that it was a hearth or anything in regards to that, or there was nothing as regards to it in this particular building. Just with 4 walls. That particular building was, or that particular red brick is in relation to where the opening would have been, and you can see from the outside.
Thank you, Sinead. Do you contend, Councillor McNally? Thank you, Councillor McNally. Alderman Wilson.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I suppose it's just, when you look at that building, my mind's drawn back to a number of previous applications where, based on the outlook of that frontage with the 2 doors and the roof as it is, it did seem to satisfy planners that similar buildings looking, visually to the one we're looking at the minute did represent the fact that they were considered as buildings, or there was some element of them that warranted planners to feel that they were buildings. And I know at the time I raised that fact that if we're considering one as a building and another application looks very, very similar, then how can we not consider it to be a building? And even when we go back to the Knocknamuckley Lane one, whilst that was on, I think, as a refusal, there was, from what I can remember, planners saying that it's the proximity of it to an agriculture building rather than the fact that it doesn't meet the criteria of having to be associated with a previous dwelling. So that was tacitly saying, yeah, it is a building, it's too close to an agricultural or it is a dwelling, but it's too close to an agricultural building to be for the site to be replaced. So I'd just like clarity in terms of because it has 2 doors. It looks, I've pulled the pictures up, it looks so similar, but yet we're taking a very different view on it. And I think there is an issue in terms of if people look at that and make a decision, well, why did you decide the other one looked like a dwelling? It had a few bricks or a hearth or a chimney, or it doesn't have a chimney, or it might have had a chimney, but we don't know because we can't ask the person who used to live in it, or was it something for blacksmithing in? We're just assuming, based on a number of criteria, that it was a dwelling, and we're happy enough with that and we'll replace it. But yet when we come to this one, we're not. So it's just, it's not a criticism as such, because I know there are other, technical aspects to it, but just me looking at it, and therefore the public looking at it, or this applicant looking at it, you would assume there could be some concern from him going, well, it looks like a couple of applications that you had approved a few months back,
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Do indeed sort of remember that Knocknamuckley application itself. Sinead, would you have any points on that? What Alderman? Okay. Okay, well, Sinead, just in general terms then, are you confident, as Alderman Wilson pointed out, that this was never a dwelling as such?
Yeah, the difference in the Knocknamuckley one, I say, for example, is that there was clearly a chimney on that particular side. You could clearly see that there was a hole within the walls which went down into the hearth, and that was the difference in this. There actually was a chimney in that particular one, and therefore, despite the external appearances, which may be similar with this, the key with that one was there was a chimney, and if there was anything that got in here, indeed we met the applicant to try, was there anything, even if he had to strip back part of the roof or anything to get to us, so we would see it and we would find it, but unfortunately in this case there's nothing at all. So in that particular, there is clear distinction between that particular site and this, because there was remnants of a chimney, and on that basis, we accepted that it was had essential characteristics of a dwelling house, and this one does not.
Thank you, Sinead. You content, Alderman Wilson? Thank you, Alderman Wilson. Councillor McLeod.
Yes, Chair, thanks for letting me in, and thank you, Sinead, for the presentation. And yeah, I guess it's following on from Alderman Wilson, and you know, I certainly hear what Sinead says in terms of them asking, or the planners asking the applicant for some sort of proof, and there was maybe one grainy picture produced or whatever, but was there any verbal indication, or was there any claim in terms of when the last potential people actually lived in the building? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. Sinead, do you want to come back on that one?
No, there's no dates provided with regards to when, actually people, occupied the property in relation to that. It was unknown, and the agent hasn't provided those particular dates, so not in this case, no.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. Councillor Cosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just as a matter of interest, Lands and Property Service on their website refer to this address as the description as being a house, outbuilding, garden. So I'm not clear whether they're saying it's a house, an outbuilding, and a garden, or all three, or one or other. So even that's not particularly clear. But certainly from Sinead's assessment, and I'm happy to accept in terms of the points she's raising. But it would be useful just in terms of trying to, if we end up looking at this further down the line, to actually get some more information. However, I think it's probably a difficult case to argue, but just for clarity, Sinead, can you put me over again just in terms of what you said, the records back to 1977 in relation to a site or a property on the site being demolished again? I may have misheard you, but if you could run me over that again.
Thank you, Councillor Cosby. Sinead, do you want to go through some of that history?
Yeah. Just basically the site history, when you look at it, there is a polygon, and it includes this particular building. And the polygon is 1977 0067. The address is 114 Kilmore Road, and there was a proposed bungalow approved on that in October 1977, which we would take for the purpose of the 114 house as it is the present time. But the description says proposed bungalow. It didn't say proposed replacement bungalow, which we normally would have in the description. And due to the fact of the age of the file, we wouldn't have that. But indeed, the polygon was right round that particular building, and a proposed bungalow was granted on this site in 1977.
Thank you, Sinead. Are you content, Councillor Cosby? Thank you. Are there any further questions, members? Not seeing any further lights, so we'll move on to the debate and discussion phase of the application. Any point of view on this one? Not seeing any lights, so we'll move into members' decision or any proposals on the floor. Alderman Wilson.
It's just really a point of clarity. I know we're in the decision mode, but just on the basis of what you were saying about the councillor, as far as I'm aware, in this instance, is it the only, in terms of the delegated list and that, the only reason the application is here is due to that call-in, and if that councillor withdraws that I'm just thinking for the future for any member, is that not taken as a retraction of that right, if you like, if the only reason it's here is by virtue of the fact the councillor called it in? Well, then if that councillor then withdraws that, does that automatically not remove it from the schedule? It's just a point of clarity.
No, it's a good point, Alderman Wilson, but I think maybe bring in Damien if you want to come in on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No, it is a good point, and I suppose Councillor Hanlon at a very late stage reviewed his position, decided he didn't want to call it in. We then gave the applicant and the agent the opportunity, Alderman Wilson, to also advise us whether they were happy for it to be withdrawn from the schedule today. We didn't hear back from them. So on the basis that it was at a very late stage, we decided it was, fair to let the application run today and have it heard by the committee. So because the applicant and agent didn't give us any instructions or advice, we decided to let it go.
Alderman Wilson, do you want to come back on that?
I suppose in some of these situations, in the past we've seen applicants and agents want an application withdrawn to avoid what's termed as a decision history on it. Is by the fact that we haven't heard from them disadvantaging them in any way in that regard? Do they still have time basically after, say they did respond, there's a delay in the email or something, and something comes to you tomorrow saying, no, I don't want it. Does that still give them the opportunity to, withdraw that application?
Damien?
Through the Chair, yes, they can. They can withdraw the application right up until the point that the decision is issued. Now, from what I understand, the applicant is actually content to take a refusal, if that's the way members were minded to go, and then take it to the Planning and Appeals Commission. No, I'm not hearing that directly. I'm hearing it indirectly, Alderman Wilson, but if they decide that they would rather withdraw it, they can do that. They would probably have to act very quickly, but they can do that, yes.
Alderman Wilson?
Yeah, well, just based on that, I would suggest then that, from planners' perspective, you try your utmost in terms of translating that message to them as quick as possible, just on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Wilson. I was certainly frustrated as well, given the lateness of the removal by Councillor O'Hanlon. And again, I asked officers to try and do their utmost to contact the applicant and agent and so on. Unfortunately, they were unable to do so. So we are where we are. Are any further or any proposals from the floor? If we are in decision phase. I have nowhere else to be, members. Oh, Councillor Cosby.
Propose that we accept the officer's recommendation.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Cosby. Alderman Anderson.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Alderman Anderson. Are any other proposals from the floor? Okay, don't see any. We're all agreed? Agreed, okay. Thank you. Okay, members, we're on to Appendix 5, application LA08 2021-0454/F. And I'm handing over to Liam McCrum to take us through the application. Councillor Savage.
Sure, I want to declare an interest. I was contacted by Craigavon about this last year, so just to keep everybody right, I'll sit this one out, okay?
That's no problem, Councillor Savage. Okay, Liam, do you want to?
Okay, thank you, Chair. This application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 2 ball stop nets that are 6 metres high and 20 metres long to be located behind the existing soccer goalposts on the existing 3G pitch behind St Patrick's College. The application site, as I've said, is located to the rear of St Patrick's College in the new 3G pitch. The site is within the settlement limit of Banbridge as defined in the local area plan, and the site is not part of any zoning, but officers considered it to be used as open space. In terms of the principle of development, policy OS1 of PPS 8 states that development will only be permitted where it does not result in the loss of existing open space or land zoned for the provision of open space. In this instance, the existing area of open space will be retained and enhanced through the introduction of the proposed new amenities. In this respect, it was considered that the use of the land for open space purposes will not be prejudiced by the proposed development. Officers are therefore content that the principle of development is acceptable in this regard. In terms of design and impact on visual character and amenity. Location of the proposed works are located along the shared boundary with the Clanabana GAA Club. Any views of the proposed development from the public vantage points are relatively long range, and the nets are not considered to visually detract from these views or visual amenity of the area in general. Officers consider the works to be of a proposed scale appropriate to the site and sympathetic to the surrounding environment in terms of the siting, design and layout. In terms of impact on residential amenity, officers are content that the proposal will not have an unacceptable adverse impact on the amenity of nearby residents in visual terms. The proposed catch nets are located approximately 85 metres from the closest dwellings in Ballygan Park and approximately 100 metres from the dwellings in Wincroft Heights. Any views of the proposed development from the surrounding residential dwellings, again, will be relatively long range, and the nets are not considered to visually detract from these views. In terms of impact on built heritage and archaeology, the site is within 150 metres of an archaeological site. Officers have consulted with Historic Environment Division, who have raised no objections. Officers are therefore satisfied the proposal fully compliant with BH2 of PPS 8 and the SPPS. There have been no third-party objections to this application or from consultees, and approval is recommended subject to the suggested conditions. I'll just take you through the PowerPoint. You can see the location of the site within the general area of Banbridge, just on the Scarborough Road. This is a out-of-date aerial photograph, but it's all we could get. Obviously, the pitch, the 3G pitch, is where the old shield pitch there you can just see and extended onto the grass field. Yep, that's basically it, Ruth. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just a site location plan. So you can see the existing playing fields of the local Gaelic club to the right-hand side, and our application site for the ball stop fences that's going to be along that shared boundary. Next slide, please. So this is the site layout plan of the approved 3G pitch that's already in situ. And you can see, hopefully in red there, the position of the two ball stop fences immediately behind each of the two goals that are already in situ there. Next slide, please. So these are the elevations. You could just see the elevations of the nets that are going to be put in place. Next slide, please. So here we have the view of the existing two nets along that shared boundary there. You can see the two nets along the left-hand side. Next slide, please, Ruth. So basically our nets are just going to go behind that goal. Next slide, please, Ruth. And again, behind the other goal. And immediately to the rear is the Gaelic field of the Clanabana pitch. And that's it.
Thank you, Liam. Are there any questions from the floor, members? Not seeing any questions. Time to move into the debate phase. Is there any point of view on this one? Not seeing any points of view, so move into the decision phase. Are there any proposals on the floor? Councillor McAlinton.
Thank you, Chair. I was happy to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McAlinton. Councillor McNally.
Happy to second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor McNally. So there's a proposal from Councillor McAlinton to accept the recommendation to approve, seconded by Councillor McNally. Are there any further proposals on the floor, members? Not seeing any members. Are we all agreed on that proposal? Okay, all agreed. Okay, thank you, Liam. We're on to Appendix 6, which is discharge of... Councillor McAlinton.
I want to declare that I have a daughter in St. Ronan's School, but I'll be in a discussion with an open mind.
That's no problem. Councillor McAlinton, so yeah, that's in relation to Appendix 6, LA 08 2021-0164 DC, and handing over to Kevin, I believe, to take us through this one. He's not on Zoom. Oh, sorry, is it Sinead?
Yes, I'll take them. Yeah.
No worries. Go ahead, Sinead.
Yes, application number LA 08 2021-0164. It's proposed discharge of conditions 6 and 7 on plan application LA 08 2018-1445F. Condition number 6 states that all works pertaining to the structures contained in the confirmed routes as per Chapter 7 of the addendum to the environmental statement shall be implemented in accordance with the mitigation measures outlined in the BAT mitigation plan as per the environmental statement. Condition number 7 states that all BAT boxes shown to be located within the site shall be installed prior to the clearance of any trees or demolition of any development hereby approved. A BAT ecologist was appointed to remove the bats that were previously identified in the old St. Ronan's College under NIA licence. The BAT ecologist was able to safely remove the previously identified bat roost and move it to the already installed bat boxes as outlined in page 30 and figure 6 of the environmental statement. Following a site inspection, officers are content that all BAT boxes are located within the site as shown on the BAT mitigation plan as per the addendum of the environmental statement. Also, officers have carried out consultation with the Natural Environment Division, who are also content that conditions 6 and 7 of planning application LA08 2018-1445 can be discharged.
Thank you, Sinead. Are there any questions from the floor or proposals? Or Councillor McLeod? Okay, any proposals or comments, members? Councillor McNally?
Happy to propose, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor McNally. Any seconders? Councillor Savage?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. Okay, I don't see any other lights on. So proposing second, so we're all agreed, members? Okay, we're on to Appendix 7, another discharge condition, LA08 2021-0346/DC. Councillor Nicholson, just bring you in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would declare a pecuniary interest in Appendix 7 and Appendix 8, so
no worries.
early night for me.
Well, you're very lucky. And again, I'm handing over to Sinead again for Appendix 7.
Thank you, Chair. Application number LA08 2021-0346 is for the proposed discharge of Condition 9 of plan application approved under LA08 2019-0999F. The condition states that no development shall commence until the applicant has submitted details of a quantitative risk assessment in writing to the planning authority for its agreement, demonstrating that any risks to human health have been effectively assessed and the approved details shall thereafter be implemented. The applicant submitted the quantitative risk assessment, which included a desk study, a preliminary risk assessment, an intrusive site investigation, a risk assessment conclusions, and a remediation strategy. Officers in consultation with DERA Regulation Unit and the Environmental Department are content that the information submitted is acceptable to discharge Condition 9 of LA08 2019-0999F.
Thank you, Sinead. Are there any queries or proposals from the floor on this one? Councillor McNally.
Happy to propose, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor McNally. Any seconders? Councillor McLeod.
Second, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLeod. Any other proposals or queries? Not seeing any. We're all agreed, members? Thank you. Okay, we're moving through them rightly. Appendix 8, another discharge of the condition. It's LA08 2021-0498/DC. Again, just recognise that declaration of interest from previously from Councillor Nicholson. Again, I'm handing over to Sinead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This discharge condition is for the same site as previously discussed. It is a proposed discharge condition 5 of that plan application, LA08 2019-0999F. The condition states that the construction of the dwellings hereby approved shall not commence until a landscape and open space management and maintenance plan is submitted and approved by the Council. DA Architects Limited has prepared a landscape management and maintenance plan. The implementation of the plan will be by a landscape contractor. Proposed landscape planting plan is described in full in the approved landscape planting plan, and this landscape maintenance and management plan relates to that. The landscape management maintenance plan is to be read in conjunction with that particular landscape drawing. On the basis of the information submitted, officers are content that the proposed development accords with what we require in such a plan, and therefore it is acceptable with regards to SPPS, PPS 8, such that the condition number 5 of plan application LAO 8 2019-0999F can be discharged.
Thank you, Sinead. Are any comments or proposals from the floor, member? Councillor McNally.
Happy to propose.
Thank you, Councillor McNally. Any seconders? Councillor McLennan.
Sure, happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. We're all agreed, members? Okay, members, that's it. Well done. I want to wish you all the best and thank you for attending today's meeting. Thank you to the IT team. Were you able to stop the live feed?